minute to think of your favorite speech ever from a movie or a play. Maybe it's Jack Nicholson's from A Few Good Men, in which he shouts, "You can't handle the truth." Or Judy Garland as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, declaring, "Toto, I've a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore." I'm personally quite fond of Gregory Peck's speech in To Kill a Mockingbird, in which he declares, "In this country, our courts are the great levelers. In our courts, all men are created equal." It can be a lot of fun to pick a speech from a movie or TV show or a play and try it out yourself. That is a great acting exercise. Whatever speech you choose, though, whatever genre it's from, I bet there's one thing that's true about it. I bet it makes you feel something. Maybe it's a speech that inspires or makes you laugh or makes you cheer. I bet it isn't boring. I bet you liked it because it resonated with you somehow. That's the next thing you'll want to consider on your journey to becoming a great public speaker, the role of emotions in verbal persuasion. If you want your speech to be memorable, you need to get your audience to feel something. This isn't a new idea. In fact, it's an idea Aristotle had over 2,000 years ago. We talked in the last lecture about Aristotle's idea that persuasion comes from the speaker's own character, which is the concept of ethos. Aristotle also wrote, "Persuasion may come through the hearers when the speech stirs their emotions." This concept in rhetoric is called pathos. So the idea is this. Speech making isn't just about you standing up on a stage shouting out your ideas. That's only half of it. The other half is about the audience. Persuasion comes when the audience hears those ideas and feels something about them. That's been a focus of contemporary scholars of rhetoric. The rise of new rhetoric in the 1960s incorporated the teachings of psychology and other behavioral sciences into our understanding of how verbal persuasion works, and concluded that the connection between the speaker and the audience is really important. New rhetoric says that a good speaker adapts the speech to the needs of the specific audience by identifying with that audience, such as by structuring an argument with the audience's needs in mind or by using language familiar to that audience. This is something we teach in law school when students are learning to be advocates in court. There's a classic lecture many law students read in school. It is a talk from 1940 that was given by the Honorable John W. Davis to the New York City Bar called "The Argument of an Appeal." Judge Davis uses a fishing metaphor to explain what the successful lawyer must do to be persuasive when speaking in court. He writes, "In the argument of an appeal, the advocate is angling, consciously and deliberately angling for the judicial mind. Whatever tends to attract judicial favor to the advocate's claim is useful. Whatever repels it is useless or worse. The whole art of the advocate consists in choosing the one and avoiding the other. Why otherwise have argument at all?" This is very good advice for all public speakers. Angle for the audience's mind. Think about what's going on from the audience's point of view. Sometimes speakers write a first draft thinking of things solely from their own point of view. What do I know about? What do I think is important? What do I like saying? It's okay to start there, but then you need a follow-up draft, looking at all of this from the audience's perspective. What do you know about them? Where are they coming from? Why are they coming to hear you talk? What are they hoping to get out of the speech? What do they already know? What do they want to know? And how are you going to keep them engaged? In that argument of an appeal lecture, Judge Davis says that you have to change places in your imagination with your audience, which in his case is a judge in court. You may not know the specific judge you're talking to, but you do know some things, no matter who that judge is. You know that she needs certain pieces of information from you in order to do her job. And those are the things she's listening for. She'll want to know the nature of the case, its prior history, the relevant facts, the applicable law that governs this sort of dispute, and so forth. So a wise advocate starts with those things. Judge Davis advises, if the places were reversed and you sat where they do, think what it is you would want first to know about the case. How and in what order would you want the story told? How would you want the skein unraveled? If you happen to know the mental habits of any particular judge, so much the better. To adapt yourself to his methods of reasoning is not artful. It is simply elementary psychology, as is also the maxim not to tire or irritate the mind you are seeking to persuade. This is a helpful approach for any speech. You may not know every person in your audience, but you probably have some general information about whom you're speaking to. You know the context. Let's imagine, for example, that you're speaking at the PTA meeting at your child's school. Maybe you're the PTA president. You know that the people in your audience showed up in the evening after work to take part in a meeting about a school. So that probably means they care about the school and about the kids in the school and maybe some particular issue that's on the agenda for the meeting that night. Some of the people in the audience might be parents, some might be teachers or administrators, but they've all got in common some interest in the school. And perhaps you also know that you have particular expertise or information about an issue affecting the school. So you could start by letting them know that you share their interest in the functioning of the school and that you're going to offer information that's going to help them with that. That connection helps you start to build that relationship with the audience. That's pathos. This also helps you orient the audience. If you tell them up front what they are going to get out of listening to you, you make them interested. And it's more likely they'll keep listening to you. You also have to think about whether the audience has any negative emotions that you need to soothe first so that they're able to listen to you. So maybe you know that this PTA meeting is in the evening and people are tired and these meetings tend to run long. You could anticipate that your audience has some concern that this is going to drag on or that they're going to get bored. You can get them to listen by addressing that worry explicitly, by saying, I know your time is valuable, so I am going to keep the trains running on time here. That means I am going to explain things succinctly, and in your remarks, I'm going to ask you to do the same. Something like that. As the speaker, it's your job to get that audience into a receptive frame of mind. That means you need to take care of anything that might be getting in the way of that if you can. Sometimes it's a negative emotion. Sometimes it's a question that the audience might have that you need to address at the top, or sometimes it's something physical. If you notice that the room is too hot for people to pay attention, then adjust the air. If there's a noise that might be distracting, then close a window or a door or speak more loudly. Maybe the audience has other physical needs that need to be met. Perhaps you want to make sure that there's water or coffee available or snacks of some kind. Lawyers know this trick. If you've got a potentially contentious conversation in store, you can make it go more easily if you're sharing food with the person you're talking to. It changes the whole tone of the conversation and puts people into a more agreeable frame of mind. I also think about these things as a law school professor when I'm teaching. My classes might run for 2 to 3 hours, so I invite students to bring food and water if they need it. I give them a break at the top of each hour because it's pretty tough to sit for 3 hours and pay attention no matter how engaging your professor might be. And I think about things that might be distracting them. That's why I ban laptops in my classes and ask them to turn off their phones so they aren't tempted to surf the internet and aren't distracted by watching their classmates do it either. I want to make it as easy as possible for them to stay focused on what they're learning, which requires putting myself in their shoes to think about their physical and mental experiences. Okay, so you're working on your speech. You've thought about why you're there and why the audience is there, and you've told them what they can expect to hear from you, and you've taken steps to make it possible for your audience to listen to you. So that's a good start. But how do you keep it going? Because even the smartest, most well-intentioned audience member is gonna get tired. People just can't pay attention forever. Most of us can pay attention for 3 to 4 minutes at a pop, and then the mind wanders. How can you keep that audience engaged so that your points sink in? I was thinking about this question recently because I overheard my son and his friends talking about school. These boys are in 8th grade. One of them was talking about how much he hates history class. Why? Because it's boring, he said. It's just a bunch of dates. History is just about memorizing dates and the names of dead people, and he's not good at memorizing. One of the other kids said, well, I love history. Why? Because he's got a different teacher, and this teacher makes the history feel like stories. Sure, they're learning about dates and dead people, but the people don't feel dead. They feel alive. Because this teacher talks about history in a way that helps the kids imagine what it might feel like to be there. And this teacher also tells the kids why they are studying history. He asks them what moments in history can teach us about things happening today. He's not just asking them to memorize historical facts. He's giving those facts meaning. That keeps those kids engaged. If you can do for your audience what this history teacher was doing for his students, if you can find the meaning in your talk and bring it to life, then you will be a more successful speaker. We talked about finding the meaning of the material in our last lecture because it's an important part of ethos or credibility. If you can say why the material is significant, why it is meaningful, then you are making sense of it for your audience. That is a gift to them because you are offering insight and wisdom, and that makes you credible. Meaning is also an important part of achieving pathos. We want to know the meaning of a subject because it is satisfying. It gives us an emotional reaction. It makes us care. There is a compelling book you might want to read on this subject called Man's Search for Meaning. It was written by Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who was a prisoner in the Nazi death camps during World War II. He spent his time in Auschwitz thinking about why some people lived and why some died. That is amazing when you think about it. He is suffering in a way that most of us cannot even comprehend, but by asking himself the question of why some people were surviving in the face of that suffering, he triggered his own curiosity and possibly saved himself. His suffering took on a different meaning. It gave him a reason to live. His big insight was that we can't always choose our circumstances, but we can choose how to think about them. And if we can find meaning in them, then we'll be able to cope and move forward. The meaning that he makes of his time in Auschwitz is profoundly moving. He's able to see these years of horror as an opportunity to gain insight into the human condition. And the result is this compelling and surprisingly hopeful book. Frankl says, striving to find a meaning in one's life is the primary motivational force in man. The search for meaning may explain why human beings are so interested in stories. Across cultures and throughout time, people have told stories to one another to explain the things they're seeing. The sun traveling across the sky is a golden wheel of a chariot driven by a god, for example, or the coming of spring means that the world is being reborn. Stories are a way of making meaning out of events. They're more compelling than a list of dates that you have to memorize because they're not just data. They're data that's being given a meaning. If you can find the story in the speech that you're writing, that story will make the meaning clear, and that can help you tremendously in your quest to achieve pathos. When you're looking for the story, think about the primary message of the speech. What is the thing you most want us to remember? Because we're going to remember the story. So you want that story to point our attention to the take-home point of the speech. So what does your story need to have in it? Here I'm going to reach for the analogy of a fairy tale. People love fairy tales. We've been telling them to each other for centuries. I'll take Snow White as our example. How does it start? Once upon a time, in the middle of winter, a young queen sat sewing at her window. As she sewed, the queen watched the snowflakes gather on her black ebony window pane. And because she was not watching what she was doing, she pricked her finger and 3 drops of blood fell. She thought, "Oh, how I wish that I had a daughter with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony." When the spring came, her wish was granted. A little daughter was born to the queen and king with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. But the queen's happiness was brief. As she held her lovely baby in her arms, the queen whispered, "Little Snow White." And then she died, leaving the child with no mother to protect her. So, what does that give you? First, you've got a way into this story. This is going to be the story of Little Snow White. She was loved, she is beautiful, she is in danger. So now we know who to root for, and we have a reason to care about this story. Your story needs to involve people. People care about other people much more than they do about dry facts or dates or data. Think about that history teacher. He engaged his students by telling them about the people who were important in history, and he kept it interesting by describing the people with enough vivid details that the students could imagine them. What else did you hear? This first paragraph had a lot of sensory details. The cold snowflakes, the black wood, the falling drops of blood. I could have just told you, once upon a time there was a queen who had a baby girl whom she called Snow White. But I gave you other details so you could imagine the scene. It made the scene more real. And it gave you more time to imagine the setting, which lets the point sink in. That is the difference between that boring history lesson that's just a string of dates and the engaging one that feels like you've been taken back in time. That once upon a time language is important as well. It's conjuring language. It lets you know we've gone into the world of a fairy tale. If you say once upon a time to a child, that child is going to sit up and listen. It sets a tone. You will want to think about that with your speech. What's the tone you want to set? What's the feeling you want to evoke right from the very beginning? There are some surefire ways to start a speech that can help with this. You could start with, "I want to tell you a story," or "Let me take you back in time," or "Imagine," or "Let me ask you a question. Raise your hand if..." Those are all engaging beginnings that will make the audience interested to hear what comes next. The story of Snow White also gives you action. The action is pretty easy to follow because it's a linear kind of narrative. You probably remember how it goes. The king takes a new queen who hates Snow White and tries to kill her. Snow White runs away into the woods. She meets the 7 dwarfs. She bites the poisoned apple. Notice how straightforward that is. You want your story to be as easy to follow as Snow White's is. And that means you'll want to simplify the action to make it orderly. Typically, the first assignment I give my students in a public speaking class is to ask them to tell a story from their lives, and often the student will give me a story with lots of details that get jumbled. They want to put all the detail in because that's the way it actually happened. But that's just the first draft, the story from your point of view. Now you need to write a second draft, the story that takes the audience's point of view into account. What do they need to know? They need to know that Snow White bites that poisoned apple, but they don't need to know what she had for breakfast that morning. If you put in the brand of oatmeal she ate, that muddies the story, and it gets in the way of the audience's emotional reaction. Where does our emotional reaction come from in Snow White? From that dramatic build. That wicked queen just keeps coming after her, first with laces to suffocate her, then with a poisoned comb, and finally with the poisoned apple. Kids love this because they know what's going to happen. Don't eat the apple. But with each new event, the tension mounts. And what a great villain. The Wicked Queen gets the best lines. Remember the question she kept asking her magic mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest one of all?" She makes all the action happen, really. She also offers some rich material one could analyze about the negative perception of powerful women and the veneration of biological motherhood. A good story offers conflict, a dramatic build of some kind, and then finally a satisfying ending. This is related to Aristotle's idea of what's required for a good Greek tragedy. You need epiphany and catharsis. Epiphany means that you have a realization, some jolt of wisdom or insight, which leads to catharsis, a release of feelings. A good story lets the audience have that catharsis, that emotional reaction. Fairy tales survive because they tend to be stories of social justice and hope. The hero survives, the villain dies, and everyone lives happily ever after. It's very satisfying. Stories help engage the emotions, and they get people's attention back if their minds have wandered. They make important ideas pop, and they can help you with making your speech. Giving a speech might sound scary. Telling a story is a lot more fun. That last point is pretty important. Pathos is about engaging the emotions of the audience, which means that you're going to need to consider your emotions too. Because the emotions that you're feeling will affect the way the audience experiences the speech. You probably have some experience with this in your own life. If you are talking to someone and that person is exhibiting an emotion, you might find yourself picking up that same emotion. For example, if a person is yelling at you, that might make you feel like yelling back. If someone starts to cry, you might find yourself getting a little weepy. If a person is speaking with excitement, you might find yourself feeling a little more excited as well. This process takes place in the mirror neurons, a type of brain cell that responds when we feel empathy for other people. It's how we sense what other people are feeling, and it causes changes in how we're feeling as well. So, when you are speaking, you need to care about what you are talking about. If you want to get your audience to care about it too, you need to find a way into this speech, because if you don't care about what you're saying, it will be really difficult to get the audience to care. You want to find something that you're excited to share, because that's going to help you want to tell other people about it. When you're creating speech, write something that you like. A story can help with that, or a perfect analogy, or a really great piece of wisdom about your topic. So you need to be emotionally connected to your topic to get that audience engaged. But there are two danger zones in pathos that I want to warn you about, that I sometimes see exhibited by my students. The first danger zone: be careful about overdoing the emotions. Sometimes a law student who's learning how to make an argument to a jury will be thinking about pathos, and so he'll really try to gin up the jury's emotions. He'll describe the crime he's arguing about in the most sensory terms possible, or show a bunch of really disturbing photographs and drag out the gruesome details to the point where the jury is just turned off. If you overdo the emotions, if the audience begins to suspect that you are trying to horrify them or make them angry or get them upset, then they'll regard you with distrust. They'll think that you're manipulating them, that you're trying to get them emotionally overwrought so that they can't think clearly. And if the audience begins to suspect that you are playing with their emotions, then your ethos takes a hit. You won't seem credible anymore. Same problem if you seem inauthentic. If you reach for emotions, but it sounds fake, like you're overacting, or the opposite, like you're just reciting a speech and don't really feel it, then the audience may not trust you. That's a pathos problem, a problem of emotional engagement, that then becomes an ethos problem, a problem of credibility. The second danger zone, of which I must warn you, you have to control your own emotions. If you are speaking to an audience and you start crying or shaking with rage, you may not seem credible. You might appear to be in the grip of an uncontrolled emotion yourself, which makes it more difficult to believe that you're thinking clearly. Now, wait, you might be thinking, I can't control my emotions. Emotions just happen to me. It's true that sometimes emotions can come upon you so quickly that they're not filtered by the thinking part of your brain. They're coming from that more primitive part of your brain, the amygdala, and they can be really strong. But here's the thing. You may not be able to control the circumstances you're in or even your initial gut reaction to them, but you can control your thinking. And what you are thinking is going to affect the emotions you're having. That was the wisdom that Viktor Frankl shared in Man's Search for Meaning. He wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." When you face an audience, you may feel anxiety. Maybe the emotion you feel is fear. It can be really helpful in that situation to notice what you are thinking. What is the story that you are telling yourself? Maybe it's something like, I'm going to fail. They are going to laugh at me. So notice that story. Question it. Is it true? Have you ever actually met an audience at a speech that was just dying to laugh at the speaker? I mean, maybe at a comedy club, but really, how many audience members do you know who say, I am going to a lecture tonight and I am really looking forward to the opportunity to jeer at the speaker? You get to choose the stories you tell yourself. You need to find one that feels true to you, so you'll have to test them out. But here's one that could help. The next time you feel nervous at the thought of giving a speech, think to yourself, oh, look at that, I feel a little nervous. And that's because I'm about to take a risk. I'm about to do something really brave. I am going to stand up and share a thought. Good for me. Because that's what makes a life worth living. What's the point of sitting home and never saying anything? I am going to speak up, and I have something worth saying. I've learned the material, thought about it, and someone out there is going to really appreciate what I'm saying. I am making the world a little bit better by speaking up. Then notice your emotion. I bet it changes a little bit. Just noticing the emotion of fear can make you a little less fearful. And if you take the time to think those positive thoughts, that fear might be replaced by courage or optimism, or maybe even excitement. And your audience will most likely share that positive feeling. That is the power of pathos.